to Miketz Parsha, sparks or tidbits on the Parsha. Tonight, we are also in the midst of the festival of Chanukah, so we'll talk a little bit about both. Begin with the interface between the two, because whenever we read a Torah portion at any particular time of the year, although the Torah portions were not divided to correspond to the holidays and the seasons of the year. For example, you could read about Passover, which occurs in the spring. There are sections of the Torah which talk about Passover that are in the winter or in the summer. But nevertheless, one of the great authorities of Jewish law, of Kabbalah, known as the Shalah, Rabbi Shaya Halevi Horovitz of 17th century, he establishes with the Torah portion, there is always going to be a connection between the two. And this is based on coincidence. Everything is by divine providence, especially something in the framework of Torah itself. It's obvious that if Chanukah occurs the same time that we read the Torah portion of Miketz, which is this week's Torah portion, there must be some connection. And commentators have demonstrated a connection right at the beginning of the Parsha. It says Joseph was in prison, and he asked the butler, whose dream he successfully interpreted, to remember him, and the butler forgot about Joseph. And on that note, last week's Parsha ended, and this week's Parsha begins Vayehi Miketz Nasayim Yomim. It happened at the end of 2 years. 2 years after the story with the butler had taken place and his dream was interpreted, and he asked him to remember him. 2 years passed. Joseph was still languishing in prison. At the end of those 2 years, Pharaoh has his dream, and Joseph is the one who interprets the dream, which we're going to read later. 2 years, is Shema Sayim. Shema Sayim is said to be for Shmona Meros Adli Min Mezuzah. Shmona, 8, Meros, light, Min, right side, Mezuzah. It's the Mezuzah. Another way, Smol, the left side, Meros Adli, Shokindle, the right, Min, on the right side, Mezuzah. In other words, this word, if you take each Hebrew letter, stands for another word relating to the way we're supposed to light the Hanukkah candles. Now, let me just preface this discussion with the statement of the Talmud that the ideal place to place the menorah is not in the window, the way most people do it, but to do it on the door that leads to the outside of one's home that is open to the street. We do it on the left side of the doorway, so the right side has the mezuzah, and the left side has the Hanukkah menorah. Now, as a result of traditions, Jews living amongst the nations of the world do not exactly appreciate the Jews do things to serve their God and worship their God and practice their religion. And in addition to that, we also have the elements in cold countries in Northern Europe. So the custom then changed, and two customs emerged. One custom emerged is to do it in the window to satisfy the need to publicize the miracle outside. Instead of putting it in the doorway towards the outside, you put it in the window. But you miss the part about putting it next to the mezuzah, opposite the mezuzah. The other custom developed, and this is the Hasidic custom and the custom of Chabad, is to put it in any doorway within one's home opposite the mezuzah. So the mezuzah is on the right side as you enter into a room, and the Hanukkah menorah is on the left. And that's all hinted in these letters of the word Shnasayim, which means 2 years. Now, what is the significance of having the menorah on the left and the mezuzah on the right? One explanation, Hasidic explanation given by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, in his work Torah Or, is that mezuzah and Hanukkah represent right and left. Now, this is not a political statement, but right and left here mean the idea of elevating the world so that you can bring the divine energy down to illuminate the world. The world, first of all, has to pick itself up. We have to pick ourselves up with our own efforts. That's what the mezuzah represents. The mezuzah on the right side represents elevating the world in which we live. Not only our own bodies, but even our homes and our property is elevated by virtue of the mezuzah. Once you do that, then God shines down the light of Torah, the light, the divine light that illuminates even the darkness of the outside. So there's a two-fold process over here. First, we elevate ourselves, and then God illuminates us with the light of Chanukah. Chanukah is mislabeled very often, even by people who should know better, as a minor holiday, and they interpret that to mean that it's not so important, that Chanukah is essentially, Jews have celebrated it because it resembles the non-Jewish holiday, and we do the same thing as the non-Jews. We give gifts, and it's commercialized, and they try to minimize the importance of Chanukah. If you want to see the kernel of truth in the statement that Chanukah is a minor holiday, one could find it in the law that requires one to rest on other holidays. You can't work on other holidays, but at Chanukah it's a regular weekday that one could do whatever work they want to do. In that sense, you could say it's minor, but in terms of its spiritual impact, Chanukah is a major holiday to such an extent that our sages in the Midrash tell us that in the Messianic age, all the other holidays will start to lose their significance. Why? Because the miracle of the redemption itself will be so much more powerful, there'll be so much more godly energy in the world, that the other holidays, as powerful as they are, will pale in comparison. Like putting a candle in the sunlight. The candle is the same candle that you burn at night in the dark, but in the presence of the sun, it has no real impact. There are exceptions to that rule, and there are a few different versions in the Midrash, but according to one version, one of the exceptions is Chanukah, that Chanukah's light, Chanukah's spiritual energy will be just as strong in the Messianic age. And the reason for that? Because the light of Chanukah is the light of the Messianic age. We're told that when God created the world, on the very first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light." Now we know that the sun was not put into place until the fourth day of the week. So what kind of light was there the first day? So the Talmud says, Rashi quotes this, that the light that was created on the first day was a different kind of light. It was a spiritual light, which also enabled one, if they had access to it, to be able to see from one end of the world to the other. In other words, it was a light that was able to go beyond the parameters of physical light, and it was a light that reflected the divine presence in this world. But that light was too powerful for the world, too powerful in the physical sense, but especially in the spiritual sense. It would overwhelm the world. So God hid that light, and He hid it in the Torah. So it's hidden there. It's covered up. But every now and then we get a glimpse of that light. That's the light of Chanukah. That's the cruse of oil that was found in the temple, represents that light that was revealed on the first day of creation, that will be revealed again fully in the Messianic age. So every Chanukah we get to see that light, the light of the Messianic age. Chanukah, we light the menorah, according to the school of Hillel, in a ever-increasing manner. The Talmud says that the basic rule of Chanukah is to light one candle per household. That's enough. You fulfilled your obligation. But nobody does it that way. We always see people doing it on the highest level, except, God forbid, people who suffered in the death camps. We are told of many stories of Jews taking the scraps of a carrot, digging out some of the flesh of the carrot so they could have like a little cup, getting some margarine, appropriating some margarine and taking a thread from the garment, and they would light that on Chanukah. You could be sure that that lone light of Chanukah had more power than all of the beautiful menorahs that we light combined, considering the circumstances under which they light that menorah. But thank God we could afford to do it the most excellent way. It's called Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, excellence within excellence, because the basic rule is to light one per household. A higher level called Mahadrin is to light as many lights as there are people in the household. And the highest level is to light each night in an increasing mode. That means the first night we light 1, second night 2, third night 3, and the 8th night we light 8. That is the opinion of the school of Hillel. What does that have to do with our parsha? It has everything to do with our parsha of Miketz, because the protagonist in our parsha, the one whose life is being highlighted more than any other person, is Yosef, Joseph. What does the word Yosef mean? To increase. When Rachel gave birth to Yosef, she said, Yosef Hashem li ben acher, may God increase another child for me, which happened when she gave birth to Benjamin. So Yosef represents the ideal of constant increasing in terms of their spiritual life. And we see that with Yosef very clearly, how if you look at the text on a very superficial level, Yosef starts off in a way that appears to be immature, bragging, not caring about the feelings of his brothers, and then he turns out to be this very noble leader who was able to sustain the whole world and take care of his brothers and test them first, and then, as we'll read in next week's parsha, embrace them and bring them to Egypt and take care of them and show them tremendous amount of sensitivity, forgiving them completely. This Yosef is a story of how we can constantly grow and become more and more mature. But that's what Chanukah is about. It's about increasing the light. We don't stay in one level. But then the question is, why does the school of Shammai, which was the parallel school in the Talmudic period going back even before the temple was destroyed, why does he maintain, it's not really he, it's they, it's the school of Shammai, that you light the lights in descending order? You start off with 8 lights the first night, 7 the second, 6 the third, and the last night we light 1. Why would you want to go downhill when the symbol of going up and increasing seems to be much more optimistic, much more desirable trait of constantly increasing? The Yosef, why do we have to be the ones going down? And there are several explanations. One explanation is that the school of Shammai looks at the potential, because sometimes we judge people by looking at what we can see with our eyes. A person could see with his eyes certain things about another person, but you don't really know that person's potential. Sometimes we underestimate our own potential. The school of Shammai, the Rebbe, in one of his, several of his discourses, has a pattern throughout the Talmud to always focus on the potential state of things and give that potential credence and sometimes priority over the actual. What is the potential the first night of Chanukah? The first night of Chanukah, when they put the oil in the menorah and the miracle happened, it turns out that that oil had a potential of lasting 8 days. They didn't think so. They thought it was only 1 day. The actuality was only 1 day. So the school of Hillel says, look, there's 1 day, we see it burning, let's celebrate that 1 day. The school of Shammai says, no, we have to look at the potential. The potential was that this cruse of oil that we found in the temple, in retrospect, we discovered that it had the potential to last 8 days. So we have to celebrate that potential. The second night, the oil was not capable of lasting 8 days because 1 day's worth was depleted. But it had the potential for 7 days, so we light 7. And we go down until the last night we light 1 because it has only the potential of 1. So if we want to ask, well, what is so positive about going downhill? It's not going downhill, really. What it is celebrating the potential, and that is what Chanukah, according to the school of Shammai, is all about, appreciating the potential. Another explanation why we go downhill is that there's a basic debate about which is the preferred direction. We have both directions and are both good. Do we want to focus on increasing the light to do more and more good, more and more positive actions, or do we want to focus on getting rid of the darkness, getting rid of evil, getting rid of impurity? The school of Shammai says we have to first refine ourselves, purify the world. So the first night we have to attack this tremendous amount of darkness. We have to put on all of our 8 lights to dispel the darkness, to destroy the darkness. Second night we got rid of some of the darkness, so we don't need to shoot all of our guns, so to speak. We can suffice with 7, and the third night 6, and the last night we essentially got rid of the darkness. 1 is sufficient. The Arizal, the great Kabbalist, said that in the Messianic age we will follow the school of Shammai in all of his disputes with the school of Hillel. Why? Because now, as we live in this imperfect world, if we focus all of our attention on fighting evil, we will, number one, perhaps not have the ability to vanquish evil, because we're living in a world where evil is so strong. But number two, we'll be missing out in increasing the light and doing the positive things. And therefore, we follow the school of Hillel to accentuate, always adding more light, more positive energy, never ceasing to do that. The school of Shammai says he lives in a perfect world, in a world where you're able to reach perfection, as the Messianic age will be, where you can get rid of the evil. And indeed, at the end of the Messianic age, as it develops and evolves, there will be a point where there will be no more evil. This Ruach HaTumah Avrim min haaretz, I will remove and obliterate the spirit of impurity from the earth. Now getting back to Miketz, the Parsha, Pharaoh has a dream. In fact, he has 2 dreams. The 2 dreams are very similar. In one dream he sees 7 lean cows swallowing up 7 fat cows, and they remain lean. In the second dream, it's the same thing about stalks of grain, good stalks, fat stalks, being swallowed up by meager ones, and they remain the same. And he was didn't know what to do about this repetitive dream. It bothered him. So he calls in all his wise men, all his sorcerers, and all his dream interpreters, and nobody could give him a satisfactory interpretation. And then the butler, who refused to remember Joseph's kindness to him, comes to Pharaoh and says, I remember when I sinned against you, and there was a young Hebrew who was a slave who was able to interpret my dream. So maybe he could do this for your dream as well. Joseph is brought to Pharaoh, and he interprets the dream that there'll be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And then he starts to give Pharaoh advice. He should appoint someone to store the food in the years of plenty, so that when the years of famine come, there'll be enough food. And Pharaoh says, you're the wisest man I know, you'll be the one in charge, and he's appointed to be the viceroy. That is the story in a nutshell. And the question is asked by commentators, why couldn't anyone think of this interpretation? This was such an obvious interpretation. You dream about cows and food, then it's probably about food and cows. Yet nobody could think of it except for Joseph. That makes him so smart. Why couldn't anyone else think of it? And the second question, he was only asked to interpret the dream, and yet Joseph starts to volunteer advice. Why is he telling Pharaoh what to do before being asked? He should have waited for Pharaoh to say, well, Joseph, you interpreted it. Do you think you have an idea what we can do? But instead, Joseph just volunteers his own ideas without being asked, and Pharaoh doesn't get upset at him. So the Rebbe once explained that there's one aspect of the dream that really baffled them. What was that aspect? That both sets of cows were standing on the Nile at the same time. The fat cows and the lean cows. Now, if fat cows mean years of plenty, and lean cows mean years of famine, how could they coexist? If you interpret the dream, they have to be able to coexist. So they came up, all his sorcerers came up with all sorts of ridiculous and far-fetched interpretations, that you'll have 7 daughters and you'll bury 7 daughters at the same time, and likewise other interpretations where he were able to accommodate that there will be 2 things happening at the same time. But Pharaoh didn't like that because the dream was about food. But how could there be famine and plenty simultaneously? And Joseph says, that's because God was giving you the solution to the problem in the dream. Because the way you can have both together is by storing food in the years of plenty for the years of famine. That means that while you're enjoying the fat of the land, the plenty, the abundance, you already have a mindset about the famine. So you're living the famine in the years of plenty. And conversely, in the years of plenty, you're being fed and sustained by the grain that you accumulated in the years of plenty. So you're living the plentiful years in the years of famine, and you're living the famine in the plentiful years. So they're coexisting. And when he heard that, he says, you're the wisest man, because not only were you able to interpret the dream successfully, you were able to demonstrate that the solution lies in the dream. That is how the Rebbe very ingeniously explains this whole story. But then the Rebbe goes a little deeper into this and gives us a very important message. The Golus, the exile, has been compared to a dream. A dream means we're not in touch with reality. Reality is that God is God, everything in this world is His, and the world recognizes only that which is godly and good, and that's reality. The dream is where that's obscured. So we're living in a dream, in a virtual world of reality, not in reality. And Geula, redemption, is to wake up and to live in a world of reality. So that would mean, you would think, that in order to live in the world of reality, to get to the redemption, you have to negate the exile. The exile is bad. The exile is something we want to run away from. And the Rebbe says, no. Exile itself, the dream itself, carries within it its own solution. That if we're not going to negate the exile to reach redemption, we have to reveal its true essence. That the exile comes from a very high spiritual source, and that when it comes down into our lives, it comes down in a distorted way. It comes down in a way of a dream, lacking reality. If we could find the true essence of Golus, of exile, that is redemption. That brings the actual redemption. So the redemption is contained within the Golus, within the exile, just like the dream interpretation is contained in the dream itself. Okay, so let's go on from there. Joseph is now appointed viceroy of Egypt, and the years of plenty are over. They store food, and now the years of famine begin, and everyone has to come, including the brothers of Joseph. And we can talk hours and hours about this. I just want to conclude with one very interesting point, that when the famine began, Jacob and his sons still had food. And for a while, they didn't go to Egypt to purchase food. But then Jacob says to his sons, Jacob saw that there were provisions in Egypt. So Jacob says to his sons, why do you make yourselves conspicuous? Why, in other words, like we're acting, we don't have to go to Egypt to buy food. And he said, behold, I have heard that there are provisions in Egypt. Go down there and purchase for us from there, that we may live and not die. So the word for provisions over here is the word shever. Now, what does the word shever mean? So Rashi says that the word shever over here means that there's hope. It has a relationship with another word in Hebrew besides provisions, which means hope. That there's some hope in Egypt, intimating, without even realizing it himself, it was a prophecy, that there was hope that Joseph would be found alive. So that Jacob, without even realizing it, prophesied that there was hope in Egypt. Now I want to just relate that when the Alter Rebbe was arrested and subsequently liberated on the 19th of Kislev last week, we celebrated the anniversary of that release. before he took off, was taken to prison, the Alter Rebbe sent a messenger to the great Hasidic master, who he was very close with, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. And it's customary when you ask someone for a blessing, someone in need, you give the name of the person, the Hebrew name, and the mother's name. When you call someone up to the Torah, it's the name and the father's name. But for a bracha, for a blessing, it's the name and the mother's name. So the chassid, the messenger who came to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, he knew the Alter Rebbe's own name, Schneier, but he didn't know his mother's name, and he didn't ask him. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, what is his mother's name? And he didn't know. So he opened up the Chumash, he opened up the Torah, and he opened up to this verse, to the word Shever. And he said, Shever is an acronym. Schneier ben Rivka. Schneier, the son of Rivka, which is, of course, the name of the Alter Rebbe's mother. But people have speculated, true, he was able to find this hint, although the resh of the word Shever could have been any other name that begins with a resh. It could have been Rachel, or other names. So it's obvious that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev had a certain prophetic ability, but he just wanted to cloak it in discovering it in the Torah. He could have known it without looking in the Torah. But the fact that he found it in the word Shever is also instructive, that the word Shever means hope, that by finding the Alter Rebbe's name hinted over here, he was already prophesying that there is hope that the Alter Rebbe will be released, and this will be a major salvation, because as a result of the Shever that was in Egypt, that saved the lives of Yaakov and his sons, and of course we're here only because of that. So that was the Shever that applied not only to Yosef, but applied also to the Alter Rebbe. And one final point, that talking about Yutes Kislev, the day of liberation, the Alter Rebbe's name was Shnei'ar, 2 lights. And the reason he was given that name, according to the instructions of the Baal Shem Tov, is that he would illuminate the world with the 2 lights, the light of the revealed part of Torah and the hidden parts of Torah, the Hasidic teachings and the legal teachings. And that's the connection to Chanukah. Chanukah is a holiday of light, and the Alter Rebbe was all about light. What is the function of light? Light dispels the darkness, of course. Light exposes things that are there already, but you don't see them in the right way. Chanukah is the light that opens up our eyes to see the reality of the world, and the way we do it throughout the years, the study of Chassidus, which brings us light and exposes the reality of the world to us. And as the Rebbe said in one of his last talks that we heard, that our function today in preparing for the redemption is to open our eyes. And how do you open your eyes? You need light to be able to see. So Chanukah should inspire us to keep our eyes open throughout the year so we can merit the imminent redemption through a righteous Mashiach. Have a happy Chanukah and a good Shabbos.